Um, okay. Um, I'm Brian. I'm with Sierra Club West LA, and I live in Culver City. For anybody who cares about that, um, I wanted to start off by saying I just drove across the country twice. I drove across the country in October, and I drove across the country again, and I just got back. And my goal was to visit as many national parks as possible while driving, and since this is a climate change panel, I wanted to just quickly talk about how my trip was severely impacted by climate change both times. The first time that I drove, I was supposed to stop off at Rocky Mountain National Park. I was supposed to stay in Estes Park um, in October, and there were massive wildfires, if you remember, in October. And uh, the entire Estes Park area had to be evacuated. We couldn't stay there, obviously. On the way back on that trip, I was supposed to stay at, I was supposed to go to the Badlands in South Dakota, and there was an Arctic blast. I don't know if you remember the Arctic blast last October, but that totally, we almost died trying to drive there because it totally iced out all the roads. Um, and then I went back across the country this year, and I got to return to Rocky Mountain National Park to see uh, the impact of those fires. And uh, if I don't know if anyone's been to Rocky Mountain National Park lately, but the east side of the park is it's horrific. It's completely devastated. Um, it looks like it looks like matchsticks, like sticking out of the ground where there were once uh, like beautiful lush pine trees. Lots of um, devastation, not just to the flora, but to the animals that live in the park. Um, and I also went to Big Bend, where the Grande River is, and you can't kayak any longer in Rio Grande because the waters hasn't been deep enough for years, they said, to effectively use a kayak. Um, there's also a couple of other things like in Great Sand Dunes, there's usually like a flowing river you can swim in, and you can't even you could like walk right through it now. Uh, in addition to climate change that impacted my trip, I also noticed a change in the political climate from both my drives. I did a drive in October, and then I did a drive again after the presidential election. And driving across the country, it just doesn't matter. It didn't matter what state I was in. It's there were so many Trump Pence yard signs. There are Trump Pence billboards. Didn't matter if it was a blue state or a red state. Like Las Vegas had a ton of Trump Pence billboards. And luckily, the billboards did not represent the actual constituency of the state. But when I went on the trip again in 2021 after the election, there were almost no billboards at all. So there was nothing, no Trump Pence, anything. I saw a few like faded paintings on the sides of barns, and that's it. So things have changed slightly over the years, over the last year. But driving across the country and seeing the devastation, it just reminds us how important fighting for change locally and then nationally and worldwide is. And that's why I'm part of the Sierra Club. And I'm happy to say that we've achieved quite a lot in the last 2 years. The biggest thing that we accomplished, at least in Culver City, through Sierra Club and Stand LA, obviously, is closely involved in this. And there's a Sierra Club Clean Break Committee, which is just, I think it was 3 weeks ago, the Culver City City Council voted to finally begin the 5-year process of shutting down the portion of the Inglewood oil field that's located in Culver City city limits, which is about 10% of the Inglewood oil field. It was a 4 out of 5 city council members voted for shutting it down, which was more or less expected. But this was a task decades in the making. It's been at least 15 years. I only came into it in the last few years. I came in right at the end when a few years before we actually did. It was nice to get in when we succeeded. But the goal now of Sierra Club is to expand the shutdown to the rest of the oil field. The 90% of the oil field that's on the other side. There's a mixed feeling about Governor Newsom because he does have a plan to phase out oil and gas production statewide by 2045, but he also keeps giving new oil drilling permits out. So, you know, a bit mixed on that. However, huge success. I can't express how big of a victory it is to have the Culver City City Council vote to shut this down. We're also dealing with plugging up the oil wells now that we're starting to shut it down. We have union support on that, which is so great. We support the unions in shutting down the wells, creating jobs just to do the work of making sure that this is cleaned up in an environmentally friendly way. The Sierra Club has also fought to make sure that Culver, or at least the West LA Sierra Club, has fought to make sure that Culver City's bus fleet is completely electrified. That's another thing that we succeeded in, is electrifying the bus fleet. Culver City is also a 100% renewable energy city. And these are all things that just years in the making, fighting for campaigns, letter writing, and just getting the right people elected. Currently, there is a big debate, I think, amongst environmentalists regarding single unit housing, which is a big issue in Culver City. There's a lot of single occupancy, single family homes here. And there are arguments for and against all across the political spectrum in terms of whether or not you should support single occupancy housing or multifamily housing. I can't speak to Sierra Club's official position on this yet, but I can say that it's an issue up for debate, I guess is what I can say. And hopefully, I personally live in a multifamily unit in Culver City, and I think it's good, and that's all I'll say about that. But basically, Sierra Club West LA is a fantastic advocate for the environment. And the best part about being a member of Sierra Club West LA is that we've accomplished things, which is, it feels like rare to be part of a group that actually gets things done. And between the oil field, 100% renewable energy, electrifying the gas fleet, and a ton of other things, you know, we've been active, and it's been great to be a part of this group. And we have, and hopefully soon we'll be having in-person events now that COVID people are getting vaccinated for COVID, and continue to fight for environmental issues and avoiding or preventing things like I saw over the last year in our national parks across the country.
Great, thanks, Brian. So now I'd like to hand this over to Igor from the California Democratic Party Environmental Caucus, which I think may be the most powerful environmental group that no one has heard of.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Culver City, even though I'm up here in Berkeley, up north, I actually grew up just north of down here. So this place is near and dear to my heart. And um, thank you so much to Brian for all your work with the Sierra Club. I am a former chapter chair of the Sierra Club SF Bay chapter and the chair of the Northern Alameda County group. And I am frantically trying to copy the language of the infill housing resolution that we adopted statewide in May, and I'll get that to you. What I wanted to talk to you about today, you know, really echoing where Brian left off with his presentation, that the nation and the world is on fire. And in the meantime, investor-owned utilities like SoCalGas and San Diego Energy, also known as Sempra, and up here, PG&E, not only have been responsible for starting literally a number of fires, like the courts found them to be negligible in having transmission lines that they did not keep up. But now they're expecting you to pay for that so that they can keep up their profits. This is called the utility profit grab. They're doing this to the tune of $4 billion and counting just this year alone. And on top of that, one of the most impactful ways to build resilience locally and statewide is through rooftop scale solar and storage. And the utilities, because they're not getting a cut of the action, now want you to pay for that too. So we do a lot of things at the California Democratic Party Environmental Caucus, but really we are a conglomeration of the needs and desires of all of our members from across the state. And we have been the tip of the spear in trying to defeat this utility profit grab. So raise your Zoom hand if you have ever heard of Assembly Bill 1139. I'm happy to go over it. I just want to find out who here has heard of it. Awesome. So for those who haven't, this would have been a bill. It was written by the utilities. I know that Assemblymember Gonzalez, who was the author, claims that she did not talk to any of the utilities, but then the utilities on the last day of the floor fight, where we defeated it through a lot of our hard work and collective action, they actually got so desperate that they went out on the floor and started lobbying for it directly. So there was this unholy alliance, unfortunately, between the utilities, one very powerful union, and I am a union guy inside and out. So when someone says it's a labor versus environmental fight, I want to make it clear, just like the environmental community is not monolithic, neither is labor. It was IBW 1245. I'm going to name names. It was Scott Welch who drives a Maserati SUV up north in Sacramento while pocketing a lot of money lobbying, professing to lobby for the buildings, but really doing the bidding of the utilities. So this bill would have basically made it economically infeasible for working class folks like you and like me and many of you to be able to afford and get access to distributed solar on your rooftop. Or if you, like me, are a tenant in multifamily housing, it would have made it so expensive to get solar on your roof of that apartment building that the nonprofit housing provider or whoever it is that serves as the manager would no longer have an incentive to put it on your roof. So AB 1139, it was bad for tenants, it was bad for homeowners, it was bad for California, it was bad for the environment. I'm glad that people power prevailed and we defeated it. Unfortunately, this was just the opening salvo of a much longer fight that is being fought right now as we speak in front of the California Public Utilities Commission. The CPUC, my friends, unfortunately was not set up to work in your and mine public interest. They are ostensibly a regulatory arm of the state government, but they have a cozy relationship with the 3 for-profit utilities. And right now, there is a fight. If you ever hear the words Net Energy Metering 3.0, that's the name of it. The utilities are lobbying 7 appointed commissioners. They're appointed by Governor Newsom to make it harder / impossible for you to be able to purchase rooftop solar and be able to afford it. They want everyone to use their transmission lines, and they have this completely fictional goal of trying to put up, tens of gigawatts of large-scale solar farms. Now, to be completely transparent here, in order to meet our 100% renewable portfolio standard goals, we need solar farms, and we do need wind farms, and we need a whole ton of rooftop scale solar as well. And what the utilities are trying to do is create the opportunity to do distributed solar. So this is completely in contravention of the governor's own and the Biden administration's own goals of 30 by 30, setting aside 30% of land in the state and in our nation for conservation by 2030. And then I'm just gonna, and I'm almost done, I'm gonna run through a few really alarming statistics. And this is the utility proposal to the CPUC. It would, if this passes, it would charge consumers between $56 and $91 a month just to have solar. And that's just for residential solar users. So larger solar users like schools and churches would be charged between $950 and $3,400 a month. They would slash the credit consumers receive for surplus solar electricity sent back to the grid by 77%. So here in Berkeley, and I know this for a fact in Southern California because we have a lot of members in our caucus in Southern California, including in Culver City. I know doing some terrific work on community resiliency. This would completely curtail those plans. It would mean that when a solar user shares electricity with their neighbor, the utility would charge the neighbor 25 cents for that electron, while only crediting the solar producer 5.7 cents. And the really sad thing about this, because the utilities have started an AstroTurf group, which is done under the guise of environmental justice. But this proposal actually hurts working families the most. Just under half of all new solar right now is going into working and middle-class neighborhoods. And over 150,000 solar roofs right now serve customers in the Care Discount program. In addition, and I alluded to this, another 30,000 rental units serving more than 100,000 people at multifamily affordable housing projects are under development right now, thanks to net metering. Net metering is the thing that investor-owned utilities are trying to stop. And this rooftop scale solar industry supports thousands of small businesses and over 70,000 mostly good paying jobs. So I already told you about the lies concocted by the investor-owned utilities. Let me tell you what we can do together. First of all, I'm gonna, if this works, nope. I'm gonna drop these links in the chat shortly. Basically, the CPUC is out to lunch right now, and they're unaccountable. They're appointed by the governor, the only person who can talk to them about how this proceeding is currently going off the rails. They already voted unanimously 2 weeks ago to completely undervalue the value of rooftop solar. So we have a petition. We've signed, that's going to be the second link that I just posted in the chat. It's been signed by 30,000 California residents so far. We delivered literally boxes upon boxes of these petitions at an action we did in front of the CPUC last month. And we have big plans to collect 100,000 more signatures. But we need your help. So please sign the petition yourselves. Please spread the word. Tell your neighbors. They need to know whether they have rooftop solar now or whether they don't, but have aspirations to get rooftop solar, because ultimately rooftop solar saves money and pays for itself. This is going to make it impossible for rooftop solar to pay for itself. Tell your neighbors. The utilities are using flawed arguments to take away the opportunity for us to save our climate and to save ratepayers money. Please join the coalition to save rooftop solar. Oh, thank you so much, Kareem. Appreciate your signature. So the first link is the webpage. It's just savecaliforniasolar.org. We have very active monthly calls and weekly emails providing really important updates about the next steps in this fight. I know that you have on your agenda the opportunity to pass a resolution. We're going to be taking it to the Democratic Party. I used to serve as a member of the resolutions committee. This year, I was not reappointed. I think, I've served on one committee or another for 10 years. So I'm excited personally to have new blood there. But we're going to be submitting a resolution, and we're going to be talking to the new resolution committee members. And the way that we will be able to get the party's support is when a bunch of Democratic clubs like yours and others all over the state and DCCs sign on to this resolution. And then finally, because I was providing a lot of doom and gloom, I wanted to tell you about something really exciting that I've been working on. Tomorrow morning at, yeah, Cynthia, unfortunately, I have to agree with you. Tomorrow, my former boss, DOE Secretary Granholm, will be headlining um, the launch of an automated rooftop solar permitting tool that will dramatically reduce the costs associated with permitting for rooftop solar. It's open to the public. You'll hear from a number of elected officials. Kevin De Leon just recorded a video for us. And so I'm not sure if it will be showcased tomorrow, but it will be definitely showcased at future webinars. In the press release that I'm working on for this, though, we have a quote from him. LA actually adopted a version of this. And in cities like LA where this happened, we've seen the number of solar permitting applications go up sixfold, which is really exciting. So please join us. Let's work together on this fight to save rooftop solar and defeat the utility profit grab. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And now I'll turn the mic over to Keren Sookne from Citizens Climate Lobby.
Well, thank you. I really hope you guys like PowerPoint. Just buckle up. I have a lot of slides to get through. So let's see. So yes, thank you so much for your time today. I'm Keren Sookne with Citizens Climate Lobby West LA. And let's see. So just quickly, like who we are, international grassroots environmental group, and basically just have one main goal, which is to pass a carbon pricing bill, ramp down emissions in a just way. Those are all various different chapters throughout the world. So Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, this is the carbon pricing bill that we support. And basically how it works is entities that emit fossil fuels, they're charged a fee. It starts at $15 a ton of carbon dioxide emitted, and it increases $10 each consecutive year. So the dividend part, which is arguably the more fun part, is that the Treasury Department collects that money into a carbon dividend trust fund. And they dole that out to each American as a rebate for the slight increase in the price of energy. So this is paid out monthly, much the way that stimulus checks should or could be doled out. So each adult gets one share, and each minor that's 18 or under 18 gets half a share. And something that is kind of important to note is that there's a carbon border readjustment. So American businesses are incentivized to remain in the US because there's a tariff on greenhouse gas emitting fuels. So things come in from countries without these tariffs or without a carbon price, they're going to be taxed. And it's important to note now that in 2021, we are one of 2 developed economies that does not have a price on carbon. All right, so just a couple background terms. Like I said, Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, there's like a bug flying around. Carbon pricing puts a price on pollution. So we really like that term because alliteration, and it just, you know, kind of helps people to understand we're making pollution, you know, reflect the actual true cost and not this subsidized cost that we've all been sold. Another thing, even though we do support one main bill, it's really important to acknowledge, as you guys all know, that, you know, no one bill is going to be a silver bullet. So it's a really important arrow in the quiver. It's certainly not the only one, but it helps to reduce harm very quickly. And actually something interesting that just came up was that even I think the threat of a carbon price actually can cause emissions to go down before any bills are actually passed. So here, I mean, I hate to, you know, read off stats from a slide, but basically the effects of this bill have been predicted using an independent computer modeling company called REMI. And so some of these are just, you know, statistics to note. Employment, we got a lot more green jobs. We also get jobs in healthcare and retail. It curtails carbon dioxide, starts working pretty quickly. And as you can see, by 2035, cut down by 52%. And I mean, it saves lives. We all know that we have to start cutting emissions. There are deaths every year right now from due to emissions. And so something that we need to all work on curbing very quickly. This is just a little example of what that household rebate might look like. You good? Let's see. So the rebate increases each year until there's no more carbon-based fuels burned. So this is just at 10 and 20 years for a family of 4, for example. So ideally, we want the bottom 2/3 of income earners to either break even or come out ahead with the dividend. But the non-negotiable point is that the bottom 40% of earners must benefit from the bill. So even if they go with a totally different carbon pricing bill, which there are a few out there, that's kind of like our supreme goal. We don't want this to be something that just ends up benefiting a bunch of wealthy people. So here, I don't know, it's a little bit small to see, but here's a household impact study. There's a ton of charts. I'm totally happy to send it your way. And this is just a breakdown for specifically California District 37, how households might be impacted. And as you can see, in this case, it's broken down by race and ethnicity. And you can see that most communities of color end up coming out ahead with the bill based on projections. So I do like to go over this, even though you know, we don't have a ton of time, but I feel like it's really kind of important to say that this is not a perfect bill, and I want to give you all the information and just let you know in advance that undocumented immigrants will not receive the dividend. Though mixed status households, which we know there are many, will receive them, as well as DACA and TPP recipients who have a social security number. So while they won't be receiving the dividend, the monetary portion, undocumented immigrants will benefit from the health effects that we will all feel from reduced emissions. And yeah, 114,000 US deaths every year, and a lot of people with asthma and exacerbated health problems, as you guys know. So regardless of immigration status, this will ultimately help us transition to renewable energies faster. And there are programs just like things that fall into those 3 buckets that will basically benefit low-income residents, regardless of whether they're citizens or not. And as was discussed a bit earlier in the meeting, these industries employ a significant amount of people, and so the bill is there to ramp things down slowly over time, but we also need just transition policies to accompany it. And so we need to push for those alongside communities of color. And so we have secondary asks, even though we are focused on a carbon fee. There was one where we were trying to get a bill passed to help revitalize coal communities. Recently, the Senate passed the Growing Climate Solutions Act, and that helps farmers and ranchers get paid for practices that sequester carbon. So bringing it down to our chapter's local efforts. So we are always performing outreach and lobbying in our 3 districts in West LA. We're always looking for ways to support local efforts, including Stand LA's efforts. And we are in the process of giving monies to Familias Latinas Unidas in the Pico neighborhood to buy air quality monitors. And, that's building relationships and figuring out where you fit in the community is always going to be slow work, and it'll never be done. So we're, always looking for opportunities to build relationships and see where we can help in a non-savior type of way. We have a lot of support. So right now there are 77 co-sponsors of the bill in Congress, and what we can kind of take some credit for here at CCL in West LA is that beautiful list of endorsers. And we have many more, but those were just the ones that I felt were, kind of more relevant to you fine people. So 4 asks for how you can help. So these are pretty concrete things. So number 1, CC Democratic Club can consider endorsing the bill at a time, that you deem appropriate, and we're happy to give more information. The second thing is you can call Keren Bass. So this is about a 5-minute commitment per month. You can sign up for cclcalls.org, and basically it just sends you a text, click the link in the text, takes you to a script, you call and leave your message or talk to the staffer, and then you just press I called and you're done. Usually my call is over in about 2.5 minutes now because I have my script kind of memorized. And so it's just a nice way to keep in touch with Keren Bass's office and kind of keep the pressure on and let her know that constituents are still very concerned about climate change. Next, urging Culver City Council to endorse the bill. As you can see, Santa Monica, West Hollywood endorse. Our next step is to get Culver City on board. And the last thing, you guys are welcome to attend one of our lobby meetings with the Bass office. At present, we don't have anything in the books, but when we do end up booking something, I'm happy to let Jeff know or you guys know so that if you want to be at that lobby meeting, usually it's virtual, and represent the Culver City Democratic Club, you're to do that. Your constituents, your message has value, and it's a great way to just really get in touch with them on a personal level. So I'll wrap this up super quick. So if you do decide to endorse, or if any of you want to endorse the bill in your own capacities outside of the Culver City Democratic Club, and if you have a certain business or a certain organization, faith group that might want to, you can do so at energyinnovationact.org. It's actually kind of simple once you've gone through your own resolution process within your organization, and you click endorse and fill in the fields. If you do have an org that might consider endorsing, we are more than happy to a longer, more in-depth presentation so that you can consider. As has been mentioned, this is a very time-sensitive issue, especially on a national scale. 2022 is an election year. We need bold action like now. Definitely before December, definitely before people start focusing on elections and, God forbid, the House flips or something. We have to get this on the books now. So your asks. So I don't like to just show up asking for things. So if there are ways that CCL West LA can, if we can, I don't know what it would look like, but if you do have asks, or, if there are ways that we can partner on things, we are a bipartisan organization, but, we want to keep those lines of communication open so that, yeah, if there's a way for us to be involved with something together, we'd love to hear about it. And that is my final slide. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and thank you so much for your time today. There.
Well, thank you for being here. I have a question, which is I'm curious about Keren Bass's position. I see in the chat that she's a sponsor of HR 2307, and I'm afraid I didn't memorize the number of your bill. So
That is our bill.
Oh, great.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I checked it this morning, so I mean, this is actually great news for me right now.
Well, I can't believe everything I read on the internet, but it does come from one of our members, so I trust that.
Kathy's a trustworthy person.
Great. So since my question has been completely resolved, I'll open it up to everybody else for all three of our panelists. If anybody would like to, if anybody has a question, please put stack in the chat. And
you can just raise your hand because it usually goes by, they raise up by order.
Great.
Thanks to the new Zoom update.
As you can hear, the original Vice President Harris will be handling the stack.
I'm going to figure out one way how I can use this to my advantage, being Vice President Harris. Anyway, Wayne, I saw you got your hand up first, and then Suzanne's next.
Okay, thank you, Gina. This is a question for Keren. Keren, pardon my ignorance. Can you explain how this is different than a carbon tax? And if it's not very different, then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, that's a good question. Kathy, do you want to handle that? I mean, it is in essence a carbon tax. The difference is basically just that the tax is being specifically funneled somewhere for redistribution to citizens.
So my follow-up is that, as probably some of us know, there was an Exxon lobbyist in a kind of a journalistic sting operation that was caught on tape talking about Exxon's behavior over the past umpteen years, and that included their bogus support for carbon tax because they knew it would never pass. I wonder if you could comment on that.
In my personal opinion, I think that a certain amount of hubris and that the tide has really changed. I do think it will pass, and there actually are some, yes, there are several oil and gas companies who do support it, and I do question their true motives behind supporting such a thing. But I think that basically sort of the world's developed countries have spoken, and so if the EU levies a carbon border readjustment, a lot of American businesses are going to be hurting. So I think the fact that we've gotten this kind of critical, I don't want to say critical mass, that's maybe a little too optimistic, but other countries have really started stepping up. And so we're kind of going to be lagging if we don't do this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne. Up next, Suzanne.
Karen, thank you. And I'm following up on Wayne's. So given it is a carbon tax and you feel you get it through, in an article that was written, they were saying there was a whole group of Republicans who would not support such. So how can we help you? Because I know Karen Bass is awesome, so our district is covered. But how can we help you reach out to the places in the United States where you think you're going to get pushback, from lobbyists, et cetera? So that's one of my questions, and that's one is for you, Keren.
Yeah.
Maybe I should jump in here.
Yeah.
I'm Kathy Seal. I work with Karen in Citizens
Oh,
Climate Lobby.
thank
Hi,
you.
guys. And I have to make a self-correction here. Karen Bass has not co-sponsored HR 2307. It's the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which she did sponsor when it was 763 in the last Congress. So it took her forever to do that. They have very slow processes in her office, but very good processes. So they haven't yet co-sponsored 2307. So in fact, if you call her office or have time to do this, to urge her to do this as quickly as possible, that would be very helpful.
Very helpful. So we're really trying to ramp up those calls into her office in District 37. Sorry.
I need some clarity. How would this be different from cap and trade, which has been absolutely ineffective? Because some people are looking at this even as pay to pollute. So what makes this different than what's happened that doesn't work?
Right. So I actually have a chart on that. I'm wondering if I could just pull it up really quickly. But basically, cap and trade becomes kind of complicated. To my knowledge, it's in terms of like measuring all these measuring all these various places that it's being emitted. And this bill is basically taxing fossil fuels at the source before they're burned. And so it very much simplifies that be your taxation process.
That will help us here in Culver City in that the oil field people claim cap and trade, they do zero emissions, but in the meantime, we still have lots of people sick and dying. So thank you. There's a question on housing that Brian touched on. What I'm looking for is where can we get data, not metrics and projections, but data that would evaluate the carbon costs that we would suffer if we do tear down and then build multiplexes, the carbon costs that are in aluminum and steel, in wood and trees. Some of the cement is now 50% carbon sequestered, et cetera. And the carbon that gets exuded into the air when you tear down buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And how would that compare with the metric, the theoretical projection of vehicle miles saved by building dense housing? Like my own personal stand is until we can get past this exponential climate change disruption, let's kind of hold back as much as we can to get the climate and life and the drought a little under control. But if I could get real solid data, it would help me get clear on really where I stand with, the undoing housing for more housing as opposed to building on top of, rooftop housing, et cetera. But anyhow, I think you get my point. And if someone can address it, Brian, perhaps you, or maybe even Kathy or Karen or Igor, which thank you. Your presentation was awesome, Igor. But if someone could address that, where do you get the actual data so we know what we're stepping into before it's too late?
Brian?
Anyone have a
Yeah, if
response?
anyone else wants to take that, I
sure.
am not 100% on this issue myself.
Suzanne, I'm so sorry. Would you mind just restating the last part of your statement, which I think had a question in it?
Yes, briefly. As we need to create more housing, especially for the very poor and unhoused, and also what they call adequate housing for all the tech workers to save vehicle miles traveled. As we're seeking to do that, to me, the planet is like a person on COVID who's on a ventilator now. So as the planet is showing us the costs of our footprint, and there is the need for housing, is there any data that we could rely on to say, like, wait a minute, we need a moratorium for 5 more years. We need to get the carbon sequestered through the carbon tax. Is there any data that would say, hey, it's wiser to step back? Or any data that would say, hey, look, it's okay to keep building, et cetera, taking up permeability by spreading, et cetera. Is there any hard data, not just metrics, because there's a lot of metrics that are being, put back and forth, but data that doesn't have us having terrible regrets, before 2030. So I'm looking for data, Igor.
Thank you so much for the question. So I wish that there was just a portal, which, honest to goodness would be like the authoritative source for that kind of data. That would make life so simple. A lot of it is in how life cycle costs are calculated around carbon and assumptions thereof. There are, though, some precepts to this. It is well established by data that, simply put, in order to house all of the population that is in California and in our nation overall right now, there needs to be more housing built. But housing for whom? And where is it built? Those are the really tough questions. That's why the Sierra Club and most environmental organizations have adopted a stance that they support compact growth, which would be alongside of transit corridors. In the state calls these priority development areas. The reason that the state does this is to also set aside conservation land for conservation purposes, which is called priority conservation areas. Otherwise, what happens all too often, and it's sad, and I live in the Bay Area, which is one of the hottest real estate markets, so I've seen this in real time, is folks moving away because they can no longer afford infill housing. There's a growing jobs to housing imbalance. And then they have to drive till they qualify, which increases vehicle miles traveled and resultant greenhouse gas emissions. Now, how that housing is built, obviously, Berkeley was the first city to electrify all its buildings. I'm really excited that several cities in SoCal are following suit. We do need to make sure that a high enough percentage of new housing being built is set aside for those that are lower income. And we absolutely need to keep thinking about existing housing instead of demolishing it. It provides housing for someone. So we need to look at protection of sitting tenants and homeowners and preservation of existing housing as well.
Thank you. I know we're running kind of close on time and I want to get these last 2 questions. So Ronald, you're up next with your question. Please try to keep it tight, you guys, so we can get through and on to club business.
Did you say Ronald Austrian?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
My question is, it's clear that neighborhoods with little tree cover, fewer grass areas, and a lot of concrete can be as much as 15 to 20 degrees hotter than the surrounding areas. During heat waves, these so-called urban heat islands are deadly. Extreme heat is an invisible yet dangerous consequence of human-caused climate change, killing more people each year. The urban heat island effect amplifies heat waves' already oppressive temperatures. Areas with green spaces, parks, rivers, tree-lined streets absorb less. And some cities have it the worst, usually the denser cities. 2 of the top 5 worst urban heat cities are San Francisco and New York City. This is the YIMBY agenda to cause massive density so that they can cause hyper gentrification. It hollowed out San Francisco, as Igor pointed out, of its longtime middle class and people of color residents. Density does not create affordability. Look at Playa Vista. It's rated an F in affordability. And the real world foreseeable consequences of the YIMBY agenda is to displace the middle class and enrich the 1%. It will be astonishingly bad for our environment. I want to ask why the Democratic Party and the Culver City Democratic Club failed to recognize this, and instead of supporting wholesale changes of eliminating R1 zoning, do what people are suggesting, which was keep the density towards the transit centers. Do it artistically, not wholesale, so you can benefit developers and create a tremendous damage that will be irrevocable to our city. Doesn't the Democratic Party, one more thing.
No, Ron, Ron, the club does not have a position on this, and this is not a question for our speakers.
All right, well, I'm going to prepare a resolution for the next agenda.
Okay? I would appreciate that, thank you. That would be an appropriate way to raise it.
Great.
Okay, so next question, is that coming from Kimberly?
Yes, hi, thank you, Gina. So you mentioned, and I think it was Keren who mentioned this, that this bill is not a silver bullet. Are there particular things that you still desperately want to have on this bill that there's somehow we might be able to push forward and get into the bill before it goes to vote?
That's a great question. As we have been trying to push this through with a regular process as a bipartisan bill, there wasn't a lot of sort of like auxiliary things that were going to be added there. In the previous bill, there was a regulatory pause for 10 years from the EPA, and that was removed. And it's kind of complicated. I'm really happy to send you guys this like 10-page PDF that I made that totally goes into that. But I think kind of one of the benefits of the bill is its simplicity in terms of getting it through committees and things like that. And so nothing really comes to mind in terms of like adding on sort of like more social justice features or things like that, because I think that might cause it to lose steam.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Keren.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. That's all the question. Anyone in the house have a, well, actually, no, we're right at 8 o'clock. So right on time. Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your help. And thank you to Keren and Igor and Brian for taking the time to join us tonight and tell us about your organizations. And